So just to get a quick understanding of who is in the audience, raise your hand if you are a module developer or at least have done a module of something in the past. Excellent. Good to see. Any designers or project managers? Okay. Many hats? Yeah, everybody, right? Good. Excellent. So I just wanted to be sure the audience was appropriate for what we're covering. You're going to get a handle today of Drupal Composer. So that's the PHP Composer template that's out there for Drupal projects. You're also going to get a handle on Drupal Console, a CLI tool to quickly build modules and other plugins, entities, all kinds of goodies that come out of Drupal Console. We're going to cover custom entities and get a handle on the differences between custom entities, content types, and config entities in Drupal 8, and also get a handle on plugins. But before we get started, my name is jcandan. I've been a coder for 9 years, been in Drupal for about 6. I have a wife and 2 crazy kids, Sophia and Theophilus. Originally from Los Angeles, now I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I work for the loudbritishguy.com. I'm sorry, I meant codejourneyman.com. For those of you who know Mr. Lee Walker, he's a very tall and loud Brit we belovingly know as the Loud British Guy. We are a Drupal shop, 2-man agency, but we handle pretty large clients, including Oak Ridge National Labs, Georgia Tech. We do web development, DevOps rescues, migrations from other content management systems, etc. One quote that we have heard from the guys at Oak Ridge was after we rescued them from a nightmarish deployment process in Drupal 7, I love features. Every time we did a deploy, I love features. So, I covered the agenda a little bit already, but again, a bit more like guidelines than actual rules, right? And so to get started, PHP Composer. Who here has not ever used PHP Composer? Okay, cool. Who here would like to know kind of the meat of Drupal Composer and PHP Composer and how that works? Good, okay, good. I'm seeing some nods. I'm just like, yeah. Excellent. So just a real quick cap of what Composer is. You got the packages repository, which is an online repository of PHP libraries that you can essentially pull down to make use of in your PHP project. And it's simple as running composer require and then whatever the project is that you want. And for example, Guzzle is a HTTP client out there that you can use in PHP projects. And so when you run that command, it will create a composer JSON and list that requirement in your composer JSON file. This is similar to NPM if you've ever done any Node.js. And there's also a separation of what are requirements for this project, on production versus requirements for this project in development. And so you have the ability to require dev dependencies specifically. And when you do a composer install or a composer update, it will create and lock in the dependencies that you've listed. And recommendation, by the way, moving forward, if you don't do this now, that when you do a update, don't just do composer update, but specify the specific library that you're going to update. Run your update, do some tests, make sure that it's not breaking anything, and commit smaller chunks, smaller changes in your project. But that's just an aside. What this will do is it will pull down these dependencies, these project files that normally you would have gone to that project's website. So you would have gone to Guzzle's website and grabbed the tar or zip file and thrown it into your project and had some kind of an include line of code to include that. Whereas Composer now will pull that project down for you. It'll download it for you. You'll have automatic loading, so it'll actually make it available to your project for you. And where it downloads it to is this vendor directory. And if that project that you've downloaded has any executable files, such as with bhat, it'll make sure that those are available in the bin directory of that vendor directory. But this is just your typical PHP project. What about Drupal? For Drupal, we've got an awesome project out there called Drupal Composer. And it does a little bit of magic behind the scenes to kind of give you some templating for a Drupal project with Composer magic ready to go out the box. What are the differences? Well, before I cover differences, let me show you kind of how to get it going. You can run Composer create project. You specify Drupal Composer Drupal project. And right now, this project is in development. But it is stable enough to use. I use it for all our projects. And you'll then specify the project name, basically the directory that your Drupal instance is going to be installed to. Go ahead and mark it as a stability of dev with no interaction. Run this, and you've got a project. So you can change the directory into that project folder. And at this time, immediately, you can begin running, hey, Composer, I need admin toolbar from the Drupal repository. But how does it know to go and grab admin toolbar, which is a Drupal contrib project that's not listed on packages? Well, there's some magic going on, and I'm going to kind of point some of that out to you, because once I understood this, it really upped my game quite a bit. So when you run Composer require, it adds that require to your Composer JSON just like normal. So here are some of the things that come pre-configured for Drupal Composer. Number one, it lists a different repository or an additional repository to packages. So a packages is just by default, but now we're also listing Drupal.org as one of the available repositories, so that it understands when you go require admin toolbar, it knows to reach into Drupal.org for that. Some of the other things that come alongside it are tools like Drupal Console and Drush. So those are available to you through Drupal Composer project out of the box. I used to think that bhat came with it by default, and then I realized no, it doesn't. But it's as simple as running Composer require bhat. And if you're not using bhat for testing, it's a great tool. I do highly recommend it. And getting it is as simple as just making it a requirement. So where is Drupal root, and how does this folder structure work? Well, the Drupal Composer configuration tells the system to use web as the Drupal root or your web root for your project. So that's kind of a subdirectory where it will stuff all of the Drupal files. And you still have your vendor directory. So if you're requiring any projects that are not Drupal contrib modules, they will go in the vendor directory. But if you are installing any contrib modules or contrib themes or libraries that belong in Drupal, there are commands or there are statements in the Composer JSON file to tell Composer to do that properly. So your themes will go in your contrib theme folder, and your modules will go in your contrib modules folder. So this is not a lot of magic. Really, it's just a template that exists that somebody put the thought ahead of time to tell Composer how to behave when it comes to Drupal. So it's nice to know where this all exists. A little bit of a note that when it comes to using Drush, you've got to be in the Drupal web root, right? So you've got to change the directory into your web directory. That's where the Drupal lives. And from there, run your Drush commands. So by default, you would just go ..vendor bin drush, given command. But there is a convenient tool out there called Drush Launcher, which has the ability to understand if you have a global Drush installed or if you have a project-specific drush installed, and it will use whichever is appropriate for the given project that it's at. And it has the ability to understand that you're not in the web directory. So I can run drush by itself. So that's just one tool you could use. But be aware, your other vendor bin tools like bhat or Drupal Console are going to have to be run with vendor bin drush or vendor bin drush. Just an aside. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to take advantage of was to be able to require dependencies from my custom module. This might be a module that exists for multiple web projects, and so you've got to pull that custom module in, and when you do, you'll want to list your dependencies. And one of the ways you can achieve this is through a PHP project called Composer Merge. It's actually a Composer plugin, and if you're in your main project directory, you Composer require this particular Composer plugin. It's called Composer Merge plugin, and that then requires a just some metadata to tell it what to do, what to look for when it comes to Composer JSON files. So you just, through this implementation, you say, in my extra, for my merge plugin, let me just tell you that I need you to include this directory and any of its child directories, so web modules, custom, star, composer.json, and then all of my custom modules, JSON, Composer JSON files, will be understood by the main project's composer commands. So with that being said, now from my custom project, from my custom module, I then list Drupal.org as one of the available repositories side by side with packages, right? Just like we did before. And I can then require appropriate Drupal modules and contrib modules for my custom module, such as, this is a great one, state machine. If you ever need to manage the shift of the state of an entity, kind of like workflow. Think about it like a node is published, unpublished, draft, legal is reviewing it, things like that. That comes out of the box in Drupal for content types for nodes, but not for other entities. What if you need to do this for users or a custom entity? State machine gives you that ability. But that's an aside. Man, I keep saying that. So one of the things to note here is the difference between requiring in Composer versus listing it as a dependency in your info.yaml file. Composer does the work of going and clicking on the site and grabbing the zip file essentially and bringing that to your project, right? It does the work of downloading the project and making it available to the site to use. But as far as actually enabling it in Drupal, right, you need to list that as a dependency in your info.yaml. So they're doing two different jobs, although they kind of seem similar. So make sure you're doing both. So to kind of get a few other concepts in our head today, we're going to actually look at a problem that I came across a while ago. It's called MyFitnessApp. Let's just review it. So the idea here is this is a workout app, and one of the things that you can do is pick a workout that has a number of listed exercises set for a certain amount of time, and you can pause, start, stop, and go through these exercises in a given workout. And so some of the requirements are that users can select a workout, play through the countdown timer, start, stop, skip exercises in a given workout, and admins can create exercises with a description video and workouts with exercises. And then here's the kicker. This is the thing that was like, how do I architect this? Was that you needed to specify the time for each exercise in the workout. So we have our exercises, let's say jumping jacks, push-ups, sit-ups, and a workout, blazing saddle buns, right? And so you got multiple exercises for the workout and multiple exercises for a workout. So there's kind of the relational structure, but I have some questions about how do we form this architecture. First off, do we go with a content type, nodes, or do we go with a content entity and actually build a custom entity? If you're familiar with the Commerce Guys project, the Commerce project, it has products. It's a custom entity. They made that decision for certain reasons. We'll kind of go through why. I didn't bump anything. So there's that. There's where do we field this relationship? Do we do it in the exercises, or do we do it at the workout? And where do we field the time? And this is the kicker one. This is the one that I was like chewing on, right? Because each, well, I'll cover this in a second. So do we node or do we entity? I went down this rabbit hole because I thought it was an interesting problem to solve, to understand better how entities work in Drupal. And I totally could have done this as a node. The workouts, the exercises, I actually have them as examples down the bottom here as content types. So you might be wondering, well, what's the difference? When do we choose to do a custom entity? To kind of cover the gamut here, there are two types of entities in Drupal 8. You have configuration entities and content entities. A configuration entity is basically, it stores configuration in the database, but it's not fieldable. Whereas a content entity is fieldable. And some of the pre-made content entities out of the box are node, comments, taxonomy terms, users. Blocks are entities now, and these are all fieldable entities that come with their own pre-configured properties and methods, right? Oh, I didn't ask. Who here is not familiar with object-oriented programming? Okay. There's a little argument in the back about whether he does or doesn't. Okay, good. So I can talk about some relations and properties and methods and architecturally, and that's good. So when do you go custom? Do we go content type or full-fledged content entity? And I got these descriptions actually from a comment in a Lullabot article on kind of just going through this thought process. And the guy said that nodes are for documenty-like things, whereas you might consider custom when you have a more behaviory kind of thing, like a bookable room. A room would be a custom entity. Or units of inventory, like a product, or a product display, if you're familiar with commerce. Nodes, or you might consider a custom entity when nodes pre-configured properties and fields and all the things that come with nodes might be too much for what you're working on. It's got a title, it's got a body, an author, a multitude of settings and options that might just be considered overkill. However, funny enough, there's lots of times when we don't even use a large portion of those settings and options when we're working with content types anyways, such as push to front page or any of the other options. So the argument really can be made even on that particular point. Content entity or content type, it really kind of doesn't matter. There's not much of a difference, but I guess it depends on how clean and how separated and out you want your entity to be. The other option might be that the client just simply doesn't want to see it in the content area of your website, and that's actually a thing. And run into that. All right, so let's see this in action. Who wants to see this? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of one of those tools that we pulled in through Composer. It's called Drupal Console. Who here has not used or not heard of Drupal Console? Anybody? All right, cool. Drupal Console, just to briefly cover it, gives you a number of out-of-the-box ways to generate a bunch of code. And this is just one of the things that it covers. There's a lot of overlap between Drupal Console and Drush, but this is just one of the things that it does. You can generate a bunch of code to give you a starting point for the code you're about to build. I know I do this. I've got to write a new custom module. So what do? I go to a previous project, I dig around for one of the custom modules that I built already, and I grab the info.yaml, I grab the .module file, and do I need anything else from here? Oh yeah, sure, I'll take this to templates folder just so I don't forget how that actually works. And then, okay, I got to go in and change all the names and all the different settings for that. I know a bunch of you are nodding, and yeah, I do that too. Well, this is kind of a cool tool that allows you to generate that code without having to go to a previous project and gives you a starting point. So generate module. When you run ..bin Drupal, generate module, it'll give you a wizard that will walk you through generating that code. Enter the new module name. We're going to choose fitness. Gives it a default fitness machine name. What's the module path? Well, obviously we're going to throw it in custom. Here's a little description. It'll provide exercise and workout entities and custom entity relationship field with time. Ooh, what is that? I think I might have given something away. All right, we're going to just go with the default package name of custom, default core version. Yeah, I want to generate a module file. No need to make this a feature, and a plethora of other questions. Let's generate this. Boom. And immediately it creates the 3 core files that matter for my custom module, and even provides a sensible info.yaml and a sensible help hook to generate the help info for the website, for the UI. We could also use this tool to generate a content entity. So I'm going to go ahead and create the, for the fitness app, generate entity content. In the fitness module, I'm going to create a workout entity, give it a machine name of workout and a label of workout. We're going to go with the basic or the recommended entity route that this comes with, but we could change this, and I'll show you where this ends up here in a moment. And does it have bundles? For this one, I didn't really see the reason to create multiple types of workouts. I just kind of figured all the workouts are going to be roughly contain the same fields roughly, so no need there. But that's one of the options. Gives you also gives you the tools to make it translatable and revisionable, for which both I won't know for this. And it generates all this code. And so now I have a source tree with an entity and form files. And it's already set up with code that generates the routes and the links in the UI. You'll see the workout list down at the bottom and workout settings above that. And so it's a configurable, fieldable entity that has now been made available to my project. I can add fields to this and also, of course, see the fields that are already associated with it. Now, this is code that was generated from the tool. So I can go in there and completely change this. You know, this could be in its own tab on the admin menu, and I could get rid of name and authored by altogether and go with my own set of fields that make sense for the given entity. Does everybody follow? All right, seeing a lot of nods. I like nods. Okay, so question number 2 on our list was, I went with entities. I could have gone with nodes. Question number 2 was, where do I field the relationships? And as I thought about this, I kind of realized I thought about this from the content editor's perspective. He's going to be working on a workout, all right, blazing saddle blends. And so now I want to associate a few, throw in the bag a few exercises. Okay, jumping jacks, squats, push-ups. And so I kind of thought about it in that sense, and I decided to put the entity reference field on the workouts entity. You could probably make the argument for either way, but that's what I went with. Where do I specify the time? Now remember, we have exercises, jumping jacks, push-ups, etc., and we have a workout. But for that workout, this exercise will be different in its time amount than other times that that same exercise was used. So I can't field time on the exercise. I can't field time on the workout either, because it is per exercise. Now, this kind of had me like thinking, how am I going to do this? Again, where do I specify the time? I'm kind of curious. What would you do? Throw some ideas out there. Go for it.
I've solved this in the past in Drupal 7 using the relational module.
Okay, is that different than entity references?
Yeah, it is, because you can have, you can put, it's an entity that can sit in between the two. So it's a bit like it, but you can then fill that little entity. I'm not
awesome.
Back in Drupal 7, Drupal 8, because I think things got easier in Drupal 8, so I've got a custom entity sitting in between, but relations.
Oh, you're saying you did that for Drupal 7?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I think you're going to like this. Anybody else have an idea what they would do?
Time entity.
Time entity. Okay, and so are you saying a custom entity, or is there a tool out there?
Time entity that you build relationships.
Okay, I think we're really on the same mindset right now. This is great. But to be honest with you, in Drupal 7 days, what I would have done, I was supposed to throw that up there. Okay, what I would have done is field collection. You have a collection of two fields. One of them is going to be entity reference field, and one of them is going to be a time field, integer, whatever. And the two would exist together in the field collection, and so you can have multiple of those on the associated workout. Does everybody follow? It's a good idea, right? I think it would have worked. But, oh my gosh, Drupal 8, paragraphs. This is what it says about field collections. Paragraphs is likely to replace field collections for Drupal 8. Field collections is on its way to being deprecated. It is recommended to use paragraphs instead of field collection for Drupal 8 projects. Now, I'm sure somebody can make the argument, but I saw that and I was just like, paragraphs, I imagine it as doing what it's been known to do, and that's putting content on a page in a laid out fashion that looks phenomenal and does the job of giving you blocks to work with on a page. And I just didn't feel like it should hold the relationship in the field, the two fields together, like I would have done with field collection. So I just I said no. So what do? I came across something called plugins, and I'm glad, even if I don't do things this way moving forward, the reason I'm going over this with you is more to give you a grasp of how plugins are the foundation of a lot of what Drupal brings to the table. And you might be asking yourself, plugins? I thought that was a WordPress thing. Yeah, for a while there, I heard plugins being thrown around, and as Drupal 8 was coming off the shelf, I'm like, I don't get it. We still have modules. So WordPress, I don't know if any of you are not familiar with it, but WordPress plugins are the equivalent of what we do for modules. Drupal 8 still has modules, so what are plugins, right? That was the thing that bugged me, and so this gave me the opportunity to explore that, and that's what I'm going to share with you. Lots of things are plugins, and they're built inside of the modules that make up core, and they make up your contrib modules that you use regularly. They define things, objects, classes that are going to be used in the Drupal project, and Drupal just understands how to consume this. This is a carryover from switching to Symfony. So we're going to take advantage of the Drupal console. And real quick, I'm just going to throw out a list of all of the possible plugins that at least Drupal console was able to do at the time I ran this. So you've got a lot of things: block, CK editor button, condition, field formatter, field type, field widget, image, blah, 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 blah. The list goes down. And there's actually 4 out of this that I want us to pay attention to. You see here I've got a plugin directory with a field and 3 plugins in that directory: field formatter, field type, and field widget. What this is it defines what your new field is. So field type will tell Drupal that, well, actually I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I do cover that in a moment when we look at the code. So I'll skip explaining that now. Drupal Console generate plugin field. By the way, the cool thing is that it does list field, but if I wanted to just create a formatter, I could. If I wanted to just create a field widget, I could. But field comprises all 3 of those plugins. And so I'm going to tell it, enter this into the fitness module that we created. We're going to call the class entity relationship field with time. A custom entity relationship field with attached hours, minutes, and seconds field, etc. Some of the nomenclature for the classes that are going to be involved. And do we want to generate all this code? Yes. And boom, there we go. So this has now been added to my project. So let's see some code, huh? So with this custom project, I wanted to take advantage of a contrib project that I found. It's called HMS field, hours, minutes, and seconds. Now, what I actually will do is I will go over the formatter, type, and widget here. There's a distinction between these plugins and what they are. The type is the definition of what the field is going to be in the database. So if I wanted to have a time field, I might have it defined in the database as an integer and store seconds. But the widget will be where a content editor is dealing with this field. And so I might present through the widget a form that is split up into 3 text fields where they enter the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. And my widget will do the job of consuming that information from the user and giving it to the field type as an integer to be stored as seconds. And then the formatter will do the job of presenting that to the end user. It does the job of grabbing it as integer seconds from the database and displaying that as the hours, minutes, second format. Does that make sense? So formatter, type, and widget. Okay. Well, I had that idea, and then I went looking around just to see if anybody had already done it, and somebody did. There's a contrib module for that HMS field. It does the exact thing that I just described. Like, cool, that works. So I don't have to create a custom field for this, at least not for that particular thing. And by telling my custom module, fitness module, to require HMS field, I can now go up to my fitness app or the main project folder and say composer update HMS field. And it will do the job of downloading the files to the correct directory. And as you can see, in my contrib module, in my modules contrib folder, I have HMS field. Don't forget, you got to list it as a dependency in the info.yaml file for your fitness module. Okay, so now once we enable the fitness module, I have access to this, and it will also enable this HMS field. And there was some other things that were created when we generated our code through Drupal Console. We got a field type class that extends the field item base. And this is where we would define the schema for how it's going to be stored. But I wanted to take advantage of something that already existed. I've kind of already said it. It's entity reference field. Entity reference field already stores the relational ID in the database. It already gives us access to an autocomplete widget. and displays the correct information to Drupal to consume a related entity, right? So entity reference field does a lot of the magic for me. Oh, what if I extend it? I can extend entity reference item as the field item and take advantage of all of those properties and methods that it has. And I can do the same. Well, okay, and when I do extend the entity reference item, I then got to define the property definitions and the schema for this particular custom field, which is going to be a combination of the entity reference item and the time. So I'm essentially going to create that array or that collection, that field collection, here. And so, as you know, with object-oriented, I can take my parent method, do something with it, and then pass that on. So that's exactly what I'm doing here with both of these methods. First thing I'm going to do is just add the additional property of time, tell it's going to be an integer, and give it a label of time. And then I tell the schema kind of to do the same thing. It's going to be a time column with an integer type and length of 11. I do the same thing with widget base, or with the field widget that we're creating. And instead of extending widget base, which it does by default for the code we had generated by our Drupal Console tool, I just swap that out for entity reference autocomplete widget. Now I can take advantage of the power that's found in that. And so I'll override the form element. I will grab the parent so I can manipulate it, shake it around, and then throw it back out there for Drupal to use, right? So what I did was I just threw on a time element. And because I required that contrib module, I was able to take advantage of the field that they created, and that field type was HMS. So now I get all the power of that. And I do the same thing for the formatter. Instead of using the formatter base that came out of the box with the generated code, I extended entity reference item for entity formatter and manipulated the view elements, grabbed the parent, shook it around, and threw it back at Drupal. But this one was a little more difficult. I had to think about, well, how am I going to store this element? Because when I get the parent element for, let's say, a unlimited field, and I'm going to get that, whether you give me one or n number of items or unlimited items, I'm going to get an array. I've got to loop through it, grab the element, and that's what I'm going to be given. So how do I pass back to Drupal both the entity reference element and my new time field together? Well, I just stuff them both together in an array. So what I did was, in the loop, I grabbed the object, set it aside for a second, create an empty array box that I then stuffed the time element, and then grabbed the original element object that I got and stuffed that in there too, and then passed that on. So now instead of passing a single object, I'm passing an array of the two objects. Does that make sense? Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so what does this give us? Well, I didn't take the time to specifically target entity, just the entity reference field. And so what I ended up with were entity reference fields with time across all entity reference field types. So content with field type, and time field, I can't talk. Taxonomy term with time field. User with time field. Well, I thought that was really neat though, even though I didn't take the time to kind of make sure that doesn't happen. I got to see the power in creating a field, and now that's all available across the board where it's appropriate. So I go to add a field to my to my workout, in which I have now multiple exercises. I tell it to entity reference the exercise entity, unlimited values. And right there, already in our default value for the field we're creating in workouts, you can see that I've got a entity reference field and a time field that we can take advantage of. But let's actually see this in real action. So Here I have a couple of exercises, and I've already got workouts created, and they're both existing in here as entities. And so I go to create a new workout, blazing saddle buns, and I enter the first exercise, and look at that, I can already take advantage of the autocomplete widget, JUM jumping jacks. All right. I put it in for 30 minutes. Anybody else catch that? I put that in for 30 minutes and then burpees for 20 minutes. Yeah, you'd have blazing buns after that. But yeah, that structures the data correctly and gets us where we need to be, and it's done. So in summary, I know I covered just a plethora of things, kind of across a spectrum, but Drupal Composer is just one of those tools you can use to generate code and get you up and running. Make sure that, I'm sorry, not generate code, I'm thinking of Drupal Console. Don't forget that with Drupal Composer, you have Drupal root, or the web root, in the web directory. Do note that there are other Drupal Composer projects out there. Other Composer projects that work with Drupal, let me put it that way. That will give you a web root of doc root is the folder name instead of web. So just kind of be aware of that nomenclature out there. Don't forget the .vendor bin for any executables. It sets up Composer JSON to do some Drupal magic for you. Composer merge is one of those things that you can give your project the ability to read subdirectory composer requirements. You can require dependencies for your custom module, and list dependencies, don't forget the list dependencies separate from that in your custom modules info.yaml file. Drupal Console is badass. It will allow you to generate entities, plugins, and it does a lot of, like I said, it overlaps with Drush in a lot of ways, but I don't take advantage of it as much as I could. And then you have plugins. Getting a handle on plugins allows you to really understand the, I guess, the core of Drupal. And so field widget, field formatter, image formatters, right? And object-oriented program allowed us to build on top of and take advantage of the properties and methods from other plugins. So that's kind of how that works. I know I covered a lot of material, but do you have any questions? Go.
I just had a general comment about your choice not to use paragraphs. I just learned yesterday that if you use paragraphs in Drupal 8 in conjunction with revisions, that every time that you edit one of the paragraphs in the array of paragraphs, every single paragraph registers a revision. And so you can see how just going in and changing a title or a typo or something like that starts to generate like exponential revisions to your site. And the guy talking about it was saying that you can really bomb your database. So anyway, good choice. And,
I kind of wonder.
Because I like paragraphs.
I learned that just the other day myself, and I wonder, with that in mind, I didn't think about that for this, but how are revisions being handled for when I make changes to a time? I guess I didn't revision it, so it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Exactly. So just beware of revisions.
Yeah, beware of revisions. It can bloat your database.
It's not your feature.
The type of thing. People want
Yeah.
to look at previous versions of their site. You know, like, so if you turn off revisions for the node, it doesn't save it, but it's intimately tied to the node. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Go for it.
So you got a real strong handle on, these plugins and how to extend them and all that kind of stuff. Where'd you learn how to do all that? Because I've tried doing this, and it's kind of all there on the web and it's around. But I got really convoluted and really lost really fast with all that. I couldn't find a good source.
Don't feel bad, so did I.
Okay.
Okay?
So just
And that's kind of why I put this together. I was like, you know what, this was a little tough to find. This was a little tough to figure out. And I found so many just great little Easter eggs along the way. That's why this is just a jumble of, oh, check this out. Oh, check this out. Oh, and check this out. So,
so no solid book to read to write your own plugins or any specific things to follow.
I'll be honest, I don't read technical books.
Okay.
I consume videos. I consume Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
Because usually I know enough to hurt myself, right? I know enough to say I need to do this thing. I'm sure somebody has done something like it, or I, yeah. So that's what we do, right? Google is our tool.
Slides available on the internet then when they're done? Yeah.
Yes, slides are already available on the. They're not. I'll make sure that these slides get up on the Badcamp website along with a video when they release it. So.
Just pertaining to that last question, I think probably a lot of people are doing this already, but I go and try and look in core now just to see, so for learning plugins, I think, okay, where would be a simple plugin? If you already know kind of what what structure you're looking for, I try and think, well, where would a simple one be in core? And then I go and just lift a few files or whatever. I mean, obviously, we have to do first.
So he's asking, where would I look in core to find an example that might lead the way in understanding plugins? To be honest with you, I wouldn't look in core. I would probably go with contrib modules. Most often, when I have an idea that I want to execute and I want to know kind of best practices, but also not get lost in a lot of the abstraction in core, because the abstraction can be tough to wrap your head around, right? Just layers of abstraction in core. Whereas if you specifically target a module that already does, at least in some similar way, what you're looking to do, it will reveal a lot to you. Recently, I'm working on a media contrib module that is going to be very, very, very similar to the old, I say old, it's only a few months now that it's in core, the video embed field. It's very similar in some of what it's going to execute for stock photography websites. So I looked to that for examples and direction. So I think I saw your hand.
So when you start new projects, you use Drupal 8 Dev.
So, okay, yeah, she's referring to the dev version of Drupal Composer, Drupal Project. Now remember, this is actually a separate project from Drupal. And so when you're looking at Drupal Composer, Drupal Project dev, what you're getting is the dev version of Drupal Composer as a project. So you're still getting stable Drupal.
Oh, okay.
And I'll find it eventually. I think there was a hand thrown up over here.
Oh yeah, I haven't done the custom entities before, so that's really cool to learn, but I have done custom fields in Drupal 8, and somebody asked where to find the examples module. I got a lot of stuff out of the examples module, and it's really good. So,
Do you know if that's being maintained and updated? For example,
I'm not sure.
I've forgotten about the examples module.
Yeah, it is a little spotty here and there. I did have to do a lot of Stack Overflow and everything else,
Just another resource.
but I ran into the same thing where it was just like, well, try this, oh, why screen that, and just kind of go through a lot of but I was able to get it, and it was just custom fields with autocomplete and that kind of fun stuff, but it works. Cool.
Yeah, example module is another one out there that's definitely useful. Anybody else? Cool, I'm getting a good field of questions. Guys, thank you very much.